morning, ladies and coronavirus germs, and welcome to your Ticker podcast for the 11th. We're going to do things a little backwards today. We're going to do coronavirus first. So if you want to hear politics, well, sorry, you're just going to have to listen to this. Or you could try skipping over it. Maybe I'll stick something in the comments telling you exactly where. Or maybe I won't. Last night, Biden, oh boy. We're going to have to be thinking about the Sanders thing again, because the results are not what Bernie wanted to see. But after the trouncing in the South that he got, I guess we really shouldn't have been surprised, at least in the southern states. So with that said, we'll get to the rest of that towards the end of this. But I want to talk about the coronavirus thing, and I specifically want to go after CNN. CNN has an op-ed up talking about how the president, in not getting tested for coronavirus, is doing the nation a great disservice. No, he's not. They are saying that during this sort of time when there is a quote-unquote crisis, that it is incumbent upon the president of the United States to lead. Well, that's true. That's an absolutely true statement. During times of crisis and high stress, it is incumbent upon the president to lead. Something that Obama didn't understand and didn't give a wet crap about. Maybe a coronavirus-laden one at that. President Trump, on the other hand, does understand this, and he understands it specifically in the context of this particular situation. Let me explain. Let us take an example. This is an example that probably plays out in a number of homes. You have yourself and maybe your spouse and a kid or two, and then you have some older grandparents or parents, either yours or your kid's grandparents, that are still alive, but they're old and frail, and you do hang out with them on a fairly regular basis. You do things with them as a family or whatever have you. Okay. Should you go get tested for coronavirus? Let's say that your husband or wife comes home and says, hey, honey, one of the people in my office got sick, went to the hospital, was tested, had coronavirus. Okay, what do you do? Well, here's the problem. Let's say that you immediately go run out to a Doc in a Box, or now in Washington, and I'm sure this will show up in other states, go through some drive-through place and stick a swab up your nose and have it tested in some kind of facility. All right. There's a problem here, folks, and that is that if you are not symptomatic, the false negative rate is extremely high. Now think about what this means. You go get tested, you have a negative test, you come home, and then that Sunday you decide to go over to Granny's for potluck, and you bring some chili, and you pass it around, and you all have a great time. And a week later, Granny's dead. You think this can't happen? Oh, yes, it can. You need to understand that it is very easy to test somebody for something when their viral loads are high enough that the test is sensitive enough and selective enough that it will tell you whether or not you actually have the infection. It's not so simple when you're asymptomatic. Some people will have enough viral load to produce a positive result. Some people will not. There's also a problem of false positives, but I don't know what the rate of that is on these tests. But false negatives on any test are extremely dangerous. And the reason is that you run around thinking that everything is perfectly okay when it really isn't. The reality of the situation is that even if we wanted to do this, we really couldn't. All right? There's 330 million Americans. If you want to test everybody one time, you need 330 million tests. Well, what if you're negative and then another person at your office gets sick? Do you go get another test? Well, how many times does this repeat? How many tests do you need? How much money does this cost? Who pays for it? All right? You see where this is going? Well, maybe you don't. Maybe you say, well, it's worth anything if Granny doesn't get sick. Okay, you're not the only people Granny interacts with. Folks, if you are at high risk, and I know nobody wants to hear about this, and nobody wants to do this. Okay, Cuomo just dropped a mile quarantine around an area in New York. And apparently he's enforcing it with the National Guard, and he's going to use them to send food to the people impacted and things like this. Okay, that's a nice idea, except Is that actually going to make people stay in their homes? Well, I don't know. Are the National Guard people going to run around and shoot people that don't comply? That's a good question. I think it's one that we ought to have an answer to, don't you? I mean, and then here's the other problem, all right? Take a look, folks, at South Korea. Now, everybody likes to point at these guys as, but nobody wants to really talk about that. Everybody's talking about Italy. Italy. All these people are dying in Italy. Well, it's true. A lot of people are dying in Italy. Do you realize that the average age of people who have died in Italy is something like 82? I wonder what's going on there. Well, we already know that this virus is extremely dangerous if you happen to be elderly and frail, especially if you're both. If you're either, it's not good. If you're both, it's very bad. You look at what happened out in Kirkland at that nursing home. All right, nursing homes are pretty much the definition of frailty, and this thing basically slayed half the place from what I can figure out. I'm not sure it's quite that bad, but it's bad enough. All right, I mean, my expectation was it was going to kill 10% of the residents. It looks like it did considerably better than that. I said a couple of days ago that I hate it when I'm right, and I always hate it when I get the under on a prediction like that. Looks like not only did I get the under, I got the under by a lot. So, that's an awful thing. It's terrible. I'm very sad that those people are dead. However, that is not surprising at all. And again, why is this centered out in Seattle? Why is it in Kirkland? Why is that where the hot spot is? Well, gee, I wonder why. We don't have a couple of companies out there like, Microsoft and Amazon that have a bunch of business and connections with people in China. Therefore, there's people going all the time back and forth between SeaTac and wherever, which was where this thing broke out. And then you had the start of this thing in the early part of February. Remember, folks, we're more than a month now beyond that point, right? Early part of February, we had all kinds of alarm bells going off with the EMS people and stuff that were being called multiple times a day to this place where they usually get, a couple calls a month. Really, maybe 5 or 6, right? Which is kind of normal, all right? I mean, it's a nursing home, all right? But all of a sudden, the rate spikes, and nobody pays any attention to what the hell is going on. Nobody does anything. Oh, this is over a month ago. It's early February, first 2 weeks of February. So it's a month back plus, and yet all of a sudden, oh my God, your hair's on fire. Well, you know what? We made this bed as Americans, folks. This virus is here. When the opportunity existed to slam the door closed on international travel to and from China, to and from India, to and from all these other places, did we do it? When other nations didn't do it, did we slam the door closed on travel to the EU? Now we have people all over the country being found positive that came from places like Italy. Well, duh. Okay, we had what, 2 months worth of warning? We did nothing. Well, you say, we'll screen from the northern part. Folks, you can't do that. Italy's part of the European Union. If I'm an Italian citizen, I can, I'm an EU passport. I can go somewhere else. Or if I'm a French citizen, I can go through Italy, come back to France, get on a plane, and nobody knows because there is no border control between these places. So what were you going to do? Slam the border closed for all of Europe? Well, obviously we weren't, and we didn't. Same thing, with Korea. I mean, was anybody really surprised that there was an outbreak there? Well, you shouldn't have been. But here's an important point. Why aren't people talking about Korea? You realize that South Korea has had something like 5,000 cases and well under 1% death rate. I think it's 25 or something like that. 25 deaths, 30 deaths. Relatively small number, very small number. And yet this woman went into this church in South Korea, in a city which is almost like a third world nation, and essentially infected the entire congregation, all of them. Now think about that. Essentially, everybody in that church was tested because they knew that she had come back repeatedly when she was visibly ill. Okay, so she's hacking like crazy. Their services involve very close personal contact. They're essentially, in shoulder-to-shoulder kind of distance. I mean, all but kissing each other. And, yeah, she gave it to everybody. I mean, they all got it. All right, but nobody's dying. All right, so here's the thing that you need to keep in mind. Panic kills. In this particular case, if we have a rush on the medical facilities in the United States, it's going to kill a huge number of people. It's going to kill a huge number of people that otherwise would not get this virus. If they did get it, they'd get it at a later date when the system would be able to handle them. If you go and get tested and you're positive, what are you going to do with that information? If you're at high risk, what you ought to be doing is self-isolating and social distancing right now. This, by the way, is exactly what the government has been telling you to do. If you're at high risk, you should be socially isolating and distancing yourself. If you are not at high risk, you should consider it because you may know someone or be around someone who is high risk. All right. Now, if you happen to be in a situation, if your personal circumstance is that you live by yourself or you just have, you have relatively young, all in good health children and young adults at home, then none of you are at particularly high risk of anything bad happening, and taking extreme social distancing measures, things like this, is probably not appropriate. Why? Because in point of fact, once you get this, you are likely to have some amount of immunity and you're going to get it. All right. So if you're not going to be a burden on the system, if you are not going to be the person in all probability, and of course, you could always be the outlier. All right. You can always be the outlier, folks. But if you're going to be the person that gets what feels a little bit like a flu, you got a little bit of a fever, you got a little bit of a hack, it hangs around for a couple of weeks, but never really gets all that bad. It doesn't really knock you out. And, okay, so you stay home from work a few days, whatever. Why, what good does it do you? Okay, if you're not at a particular risk, what good does it do you to go rush the doctor's office and demand a test and demand it? What are you going to do with the information? Because here's the thing: if you test negative and you are around people that are at high risk and you're doing it because you're concerned about protecting others, and you test negative, it's a false negative, you're going to give it to somebody. Why don't you just take the steps that would be prudent anyway? Why don't you tell Granny not to come over for the next month? Let's be frank. Granny shouldn't be doing this anyway. She shouldn't be hanging out with you. You do not know that you are actually negative for the virus. You can believe it, and you can be wrong. And if you are wrong, what good does it do you? President Trump does not have any of the particular markers that lead him to believe that he has been exposed. If he goes and takes a test, what's the purpose? What is the actual purpose? Matt Gaetz, by the way, sat in a Walmart and went and had a test, and then he slept in a Walmart, supposedly. All right. Well, the test came back negative. But does this mean Matt Gaetz does not have the virus? Remember, he was actually at CPAC where it was possible that he was exposed. Well, no, it doesn't mean he doesn't have it. That's the problem. So now if Matt goes around shaking hands and hobnobbing with a bunch of 85-year-old seniors down in Emerald Coast, of which there are a lot of them, he may actually be positive, and if he is, he's going to kill people. Wouldn't it be better if Matt Gaetz just didn't do that for a while? Yes, he's going to self-isolate for a short period of time. Yeah, I know that. But you know what? Why don't we just cut the bullshit? All right? If you want to make a recommendation that people should self-isolate to a reasonable extent, in other words, stay away from big public gatherings and say, hey, listen, that's a really good idea anyway, right? It is. I know. Nobody thinks this is something. You know what? The regular, ordinary flu kills something like 3,000 people in South Korea a year. 3,000. Do you realize that we managed to kill 1/100th of those with Wu flu in South Korea? Okay, 1/100th. And yet everybody's hair is on fire. Why is the death rate so low there? Well, I wonder. You don't think there's a slight... Look at the people in South Korea. Then look at the people in Walmart. You don't think there's a difference, do you? Whose responsibility is that? Why is it okay for everybody over here to be, well, what they are? Well, because it's a personal choice, right? You have the right to do that. It's personal choice. Guess what? It can be dangerous. Do you really think that this is the last time we're going to see a bug that comes over here in the United States? This particular virus is in some ways unique. Influenza not only kills old and infirm people every year, it also has a habit of killing very young people. It kills a lot of babies. And that is the paradox is that this virus doesn't appear to attack young children at all. They get sick, but subclinically. In fact, a significant number of them have no symptoms whatsoever. They don't run a fever. They don't feel bad. but they have the virus, and they fight it off, and every life goes on. No big deal. All right, now here's the other thing to think about, folks. We don't yet know whether or not getting this thing gives you any immunity against a strain or both. There's two we know of that are out there in the wild. There's one that's more virulent than the other. But we don't know today whether or not having one of the versions gives you some amount of immunity against the other, whether it gives you none, or whether it gives you nearly complete immunity. We have no idea. All right, we have no reason to believe it gives you complete immunity, but we don't know, and we also don't know whether or not the immunity is permanent. In other words, if you get it with some viruses, the immunity wears off after a while. We don't know if there is conferred immunity, if there is, for how long, how good it is, and these are all things we don't have answers to. Science has not yet provided them. We'll figure it out, but not tomorrow. But let us say, for the sake of argument, that you do get a decent amount of immunity, and maybe against that particular strain you get complete immunity. Well, if you're healthy, would you rather have it now, or would you rather have it when Granny gets it? Because let's face reality, unless Granny's going to stuff herself in her house for the rest of her natural life, she's probably eventually going to have to fight this thing off. And maybe, just maybe, we'll have figured something out by then. So for her, not getting it now is a really good idea. And if she can avoid getting it at all, that's an even better idea. But remember the 1918 pandemic, which was the Spanish flu, of course, which is misnamed because it didn't really originate in Spain. They were just the first people who actually told anybody about it. But when the Spanish pandemic hit, it infected the majority of the people on the planet. And that's something you need to think about, because that basically means that you're odds on to get this thing. If this really has that kind of virulence, if it passes around that easily, even if warm weather attenuates it, when it does, and that's going to start here in the next month or two in the United States, okay, it's going to start warming up all over the place. It's not going to go away. It's going to become much less frequent, but it's not going to go away. And then this winter, it's going to come roaring back. And anybody that is counting on a vaccine to be ready before then is out of their frickin' minds. Okay? Yeah, I know. There's all kinds of biotech companies that are screaming that they have something. Well, you know what? First off, those that are publicly traded, I don't believe them. They have every reason to lie, especially when the stock market is crashing. And they are all running as perpetual money furnaces. They need people to continue to pour money into the furnace, right? So what better way to do that than to convince people that you have a cure for the Wu flu on the way? Is it true? Who knows? Coronavirus is a notoriously difficult to vaccinate for. Always have been. In fact, as far as I know, there's never been a truly successful coronavirus vaccine. I may be wrong about that, but the literature that I've looked at suggests well, I can't find any evidence of it. If it's there, it's there, but I haven't seen it yet, okay? So this may be chasing a unicorn, literally. We don't know. But look, folks, the idea that somehow leadership would be sitting there getting tested, we're going to do this on TV, and they're going to run the results, and they're going to give it, okay, I'm negative. The example is that all 330 million Americans should go do this? No, I'm sorry, it's not. I got, folks, that just isn't the case. All right, now if you're symptomatic and you think that it might be coronavirus, and especially if your condition starts to deteriorate, or you are regularly around somebody else who is at high risk, that's a different story. All right, but the facts of the matter are that at this point, anybody who is at a high risk ought not be around you or anybody else. And if they are, then that's kind of stupid, because as things stand right now, those people that are high risk, they're the ones that really do have a bad dice roll that could be coming their way. And we don't want that to happen, right? Well, maybe some people do. I could probably come up with a list of politicians that, never mind. But look, don't lose your head over this stuff, folks. Buying rolls of toilet paper. You're talking about a basically zero situation here in terms of actual risk for ordinarily healthy people, in terms of compared to everything else, folks. This is not that much more lethal. You look at the South Korean example, okay? Look at this rate, at this point, their infection rate's going down, their death rate's going down, their recovery rate is going up. All right, those are facts. Now, did they basically tell people, wear masks when you're out in public, stay away from large social gatherings and from social gatherings in general? Yes, they did. And you know what? That's not bad advice. That's actually very good advice. But there's a difference between that and stab everybody in the arm with a test. And may I point out that South Korea did about 100,000 tests, 100,000, and they found something like 7,000 cases. Okay, so less than 1 in 10 of the people who went got tested were positive. All right, and they have 50 million citizens. So how many tests are you proposing that we have here in the United States again? Ratio this thing up. Okay, ratio this thing up. All right, so you're telling me that we should do 500,000 tests in the United States right here and right now? 500,000. And out of that, we're going to come up with, 35,000 positives, of which almost none are going to have serious cases. 99% of the cases in Korea were mild or non-existent symptoms. 99%. Didn't even require any medical attention at all. Mild. Think about this, folks. This is, I understand. It's scary. It's a bug. Okay. By God, we got to, it's a horrible thing. Hey, listen, it is a horrible thing if you happen to be on the wrong end of it. But use your head. The problems here are not with the ordinary American. They are with those people who are compromised. They have serious problems. All right. Now, politics. It looks to me at this point like Biden is running the table. At least in all the states that matter. And this is a very bad situation for Bernie. As I said when the voting started yesterday, that the probability is that if that happens, Sanders is essentially a protest candidate. That looks increasingly likely. I'm not going to go through all of the analysis on this until a little bit later today. I will, and I'll probably provide some kind of an update on it tomorrow. But as it stands right now, as I'm looking at the results, I don't know where Bernie goes with this. And frankly, that Bernie did not destroy Joe after that nonsense that Biden pulled in Michigan among the auto workers and stuff just shocks me. Okay, but it is what it is. Apparently people would like to have a senile old coot as opposed to a Bolshevik. I'm not really sure how real Biden's candidacy is at this point, or whether or not he's a placeholder for some other Democrat. You'd have to ask the people that voted for him that, because obviously I didn't and can't and, wouldn't be at this particular point anyway, because I'm not in any of those states. But that's kind of my question right now was this really a vote for Biden, or was, is there something else going on here within the Democrat, hive mind, if you will? Not within, look, folks, I don't know what's going on in the DNC. I think they're crazy, but within the hive mind of the Democrat electorate, the people who go out there and actually push buttons and pull levers and, mark science cards. I'd love to talk to some of them and say, hey, did you really vote for Biden, or are you voting for somebody who you think is going to stand in for him when he falls over dead from either coronavirus or dementia or gets 25th Amendmented, or when something terrible happens, so to speak, where he does not get to actually sit in the chair? Because it seems to me, from what I'm seeing with his campaign so-called performances, that he's clearly mentally challenged to the point that he's unfit to sit as president of the United States. And somebody certainly will try to raise that kind of challenge. Now, of course, the problem is the cabinet would be the one that would have to do it. Good luck finding the cabinet members that would actually remove the guy that, it's not going to happen. But falling over dead is certainly a possibility. I mean, the guy is old. The same thing for Sanders. I mean, hell, Sanders could have a heart attack tomorrow. So another one. But I wonder, we've got a bunch of geriatric, people here. This is really rather interesting because, Trump isn't exactly a spring chicken either. And yet, in terms of vitality and getting around and doing things, despite being quite fat, he makes these other guys, he actually looks pretty damn good, compared up against them on a physical basis. So, I'm kind of curious as to how this all works out. There's been some modification and talk about changing campaign schedules and stuff because of the coronavirus. We'll see whether or not that plays out too. obviously, if either Biden or Bernie was to get this thing, that could potentially be a game changer, because they're both in the bracket that you got to wonder, right? I mean, especially Sanders with with the pre-existing condition with his heart. I don't know what Joe's physical health looks like. I mean, mentally, the guy's a wreck. So anyway, that's where we stand, folks. Boy, I'm delegate counts. I'm going to have to go through and take a look and see exactly where this stands. But by every indication, I think Bernie has lost again, and he didn't get to the convention to do it. So we'll see what happens. I don't know that I would expect him to quit, but I'm starting to run out of possible scenarios where he can actually even get into the position where he has a plurality of delegates. And without that, without managing to break the absolute majority, there's nothing he can do, because Biden wins on the first ballot. So, there you go. Now all it is who's Biden put out there as the VP? I don't know. Let's see. No, we wouldn't want Vice President Pantsuit, would we? That wouldn't be what people are actually playing for. Is a way to get President Pantsuit? Nah, come on. That would. You know what? All I will say is this: if Biden is the nominee, Trump is going to have a damned field day with this. Let me take a guy. Have a good one.